this is the exact place from where we have left from our previous tutorial, that is connecting our mobile app with the Ssms SQL DB. In our previous video, what I found was people were not implementing the video's bug fixes fully and trying to connect their mobile app with the SQL SSMS DB, and found that lots of bugs are coming up of their own. So I really recommend you to watch my full video. You can see over here. I'll just scroll it up, and then you have to watch and fix all the bugs in Windows system, and then you can see over here, and finally we have fixed issue on the Android side too. So you can see we have a source code for this video, and I'll just give this video's link in this video's description below, and you can just check it out, the part 1 for connecting our mobile app with the SQL SSMS DB with CRUD functionality. Let's go to the main page.xaml, which is our starting page. That is, our app.xaml gets initialized from the main page, and we know that. And you can see we are going to redesign this whole UI, and this UI is going to a very basic one. And I know that you are really expert on designing UIs, and I really don't want to mess around. Here I'll just create 4 buttons and then remove this line of code because we don't need anything. You can see over here we just need a button that's get clicked, and then we'll just get a secure connection. Correct. Now I'm just going to create a grid view, and then I'll just separate our mobile screen to 3 parts, that is grid row definition as auto, and auto, and then we have to put our whole item inside the scroll view, right? That's how our whole UI gets scrolled whenever we have a different type of orientation too. Now you can see I have just divided my screen with the help of this grid row definition line, and then I have put a button inside it. On grid.row0 we'll be adding a stack layout which will wrap our 3 entry fields, and on grid.row1 we'll be adding 4 buttons which will perform all the CRUD operation, that is get, post, put and delete. Now here I have already told you we'll be adding 3 entry fields, and you can see on grid.row1 we'll be adding 4 buttons, but right now I'm just adding only 1 button over here. So there is a gap in middle of our grid.row0 and grid.row1. That is because of a stack layout I have just placed. Now here we have an entry field, and we'll be adding 3 controls with ID property, title property and the body property, and which will be sent to the SSMS SQL DB. You can see over here it requires ID, title and body, which will be collected from our mobile UI. So we'll be adding an entry field and giving a X name for this first entry field, that is our ID, and giving as user ID. And the same goes to our title and the body too, because we are sending 3 values, right? If you are sending 5 values, 10 values, no issues. You can just create entry fields and then pass it to the SSMS SQL DB. Okay, so here enter the body, and we'll be giving different name for our different entry field, but our stack layout should be oriented as vertical, so that we'll be placing 3 item on orientation as vertical, that will be aligned. Now we can see I'm just giving different X name, that is mandatory step in order to give different name to the different control field, that is our entry control. Now our next work is to create 4 buttons. That's why I'm just going to create grid.row1. I have already told that we'll be adding 4 buttons, that is our CRUD operation buttons, that is get, post, put and delete buttons over here, so that we'll perform all the steps as well as functionality for completing our CRUD operation in this video. So this video is going to be long. You have to be patient and then follow along with me. Now let's create 2 rows as well as the 2 columns, so that we will be placing our corresponding buttons in each of the row items and the column items. So here we will be differentiating our grid into 4 parts, that is 2 rows as well as 2 columns, and we will be placing our button. So now let's remove this clicked event handler from here, as we don't need as of now, because we are going to create 4 buttons that will help us to perform our CRUD operation, that is post, put, delete as well as our get operation. Now here we can see I have just copied and pasted this button code over here. Now I'll just place our first button on grid.row 0, and then we'll be placing that second button on grid.row 1. So you can see our first button will be on the grid.row 0. Now I'm going to paste the column code in all our 4 buttons, so that we'll be placing our first button on grid.row 0, column 0, second button on grid.row 0, column 1, and third button on grid.row 1, column 0, and fourth button on grid.row 1, column 1. That is, you can see how we're gonna separate our different buttons on different columns. So here I'll just remodify the text for each button. That is our CRUD operation, that is get post operation, that is on second button, third on put as well as update operation, and the fourth is our delete operation, correct? That is our CRUD operation. Now we are going to give different names for these buttons. So you can see we'll be giving X name for each button, that is our get button, post button, put as well as delete button. So this is our first get button, this is our second button, that is our post button, this is our put as well as update button. You can just give X name as update button, third button, and fourth button is our delete operation. Now creating click handler allows us to do any operations regarding that button clicked. So whenever this first button clicked, then do anything as you like. So I'm just going to create another event handler for the button click, that is our second button, this is our third button, that whenever it's clicked, then we will be performing its functionality. So this is our fourth button. So what happens when delete button is clicked? Now let's go to the .cs part, because we have completed our XAML part. Now you can see we have all the event handler properties that are automatically added whenever we created a new event handler for each button click. Now our next work is to create a new button like how we have done in our previous video, that is checking our connection whenever the button was clicked. Now here we have created a button, and I'll be putting that button on grid.row 1. You can see how the UI gets updated, and we'll be placing our background color as well as text color on this button. Now our next work is to create event handler, that is our same event handler that we have created in our previous video. That is, whenever that button is clicked, then we were checking the connection, correct? So that is the same thing that will be performed on that grid.row 1 button. Now here I'm just going to give column definition as star comma star, so that we are equally dividing our button on each column. So that is grid.column 0 and grid.column 1. I'm just going to give our update button name as update operation. That's all. Let me scroll to the left. Now we have next objective, that is adding a list view and showing all the list items from our table that is inside our Ssms SQL DB. So here I'm just going to give a list view X name as my list view, and it is basically just like consuming a REST API, that is grabbing all the contents from our Ssms SQL DB. So these all items will be displayed like inside our list view. So here I'm just going to place that list view inside grid.row 3. You can see over here that will be placed in that blank area. Now it has something called as list view dot item template, and inside item template we have data template. So it has closing tag 2. Now we'll be adding a view cell inside the data template, and then adding 3 controls, that is our level control over here, so that it will display all the 3 items, that is ID, title, and the body from our Ssms SQL DB table. So here I'm just going to again create row definition as auto comma auto comma auto, that is 3 items will be adding, right? If you have 5 item or 10 item, no worries, you can just create as much as row definition as you can, and then put it inside the list view. Now let me expand this whole IDE, that is our Visual Studio 2019 as of now, and if you have Visual Studio 2022 then no issues, you can just continue with it. Now let's go to the main page.xaml.cs. I'll just expand this IDE as of now, and then where is my stop button. So this is the stop button. I just need to drag that thing below. So let me just drag it below. Okay, over here. All right, so I can just stop the project from here. Now we have to share our SQL connection between the button click event. That's why we are not going to repeat this line of code, but it is highly recommended you to create some different classes to handle this SQL connection. But in order to make this video really simple, I'm just going to share this SQL connection, so that we will be using this SQL connection at line number 22 throughout the button click events. Now we can just safely copy this line of code, that is SQL connection space the variable name, and then use this variable in line number 23 back again, so that we'll be using that connection string throughout the app. Now it's safe to remove this line of code because we have already created a variable that will be used throughout the button click events. So by pressing Ctrl K and C, we can just comment the code. Now you can see we have already a variable that opens up the connection whenever our check connection button is clicked. That is from our main page.xaml. You can see we have already check connection button. So this is a get button, which when clicked grabs all the list items from our Ssms SQL DB table and then adds it inside the model class that we will create right now. So we'll be creating a model class which will be a list, which will be grabbing all the list item from our Ssms SQL DB. So let's create a model class which will have properties name as ID. You can see over here that is ID. So I'm just going to give a name as ID, see the same as it is, and then I'll just copy and paste in order to save some time. So public string, and the second field is the title property. We'll be adding it, and then we'll be adding our third field, that is our body field. You can see over here. So this is the body field that we have. So this model class is going to collect all the items from our Ssms SQL DB and then add it inside the list view of this own model class. So we'll be creating a model class which will be grabbing these three items. So you can see over here. Thing is, I want your research on Ssms SQL DB internally, like how we gonna create some primary keys, foreign keys, and here I'm just creating a manual way to add the IDs, but here the recommended way is adding the primary key and then incrementing the IDs, and then you can see over here we can just create the new database diagram. So this is your own research, and this video was made in order to help the beginners to learn about the Ssms SQL DB and integrate inside our mobile app. So I want your own research to investigate more, dig into more, create some primary key, foreign key, attach 2 or 3 tables, and then play around with the mobile app by connecting it directly to the Ssms SQL DB. So here I'm just manually adding the ID, title, and the body. So the recommended way is creating some primary key which will auto increment it. Now our next work that I have already told is creating a list view of this model class and then attaching all the list items from our Ssms SQL DB to this list, so that our UI is going to collect this variable name, that is my table list variable name, and then grab all the items, that is title, ID, as well as the body property. Now our next work is to open up the connection. So you can see over here I'm just going to open the connection whenever our get button, get operation is click. That is our get button, that is our CRUD operation. Now we are going to create a SQL query, and then we'll be using our query string, and you should know about the query string in order to play around with Ssms SQL DB, and it's really simple. And if you have already studied some computer courses as well as science courses, then you will be really familiar with this type of statements, that is select star from dbo.mytable. So dbo.mytable is the table name that I have. So there are lots of as well as YouTube videos or Twitch videos regarding Ssms SQL DB, which helps us to understand and then dig deep inside the SQL connection using the CSAP and the SSMS connection. You can see over here. So lots of tutorials are there. I really recommend you to play around with more, but in this video we are just going to make our life easy by just implementing some basic queries in order to get our list items from our dbo.my table. So you can see over here, after selecting top 1000 rows, then we are able to get our list item from dbo.my table. But implementing same thing, like same query from here, I'm just going to copy it. That is, select start from dbo.my table is going to confirm that after pasting it over here, then clicking on execute helps us to execute as well as get all the list items from our dbo.my table. Confirm that this query string works. Now our next work is to create command and then use a variable name as command for SQL command, and then create a new SQL command, and then you can see we are going to paste our query string inside the SQL command and then separate it with the connection that we have already defined is it as a global variable. So now we are all done. Our next work is to read the data from our SSMS SQL DB table with the help of this reader. So it will just execute the reader with the help of SQL data reader. Then we are going to read it with the reader.read operation. So it will be inside a while loop, that is, it will keep on reading the values till it gets end. That's why we use a while loop. And then we will be adding the class. You can see over here a class name as my table list. It has some values, that is ID, title as well as body. These three fields will be added with the read value from our SSMS SQL DB. That is, we know that ID is inside my table list, right? So this ID is going to be fed with the reader read value from our SSMS SQL DB. And in order to do that, the ID is string as of now. That's why we are going to convert it to a int32, that is reader dot, it's not dot, it will be inside the parameters, and then it will just get the parameter field name as ID from our SSMS SQL DB, that is this ID. So you have to watch out for ID that is going to get the value as well as the ID that is going to be sent from the SSMS SQL DB. So we have another property name as body inside my table list. That's why it will be assigned with the reader value from our SSMS SQL DB. So it will be named it as title. So the title, it will be title, the second field, and then to string. So this is the second field that we have, and I have done something mistake over here. Let's refix it whenever I paste it over here. So we have another field name as title in our my table list, which will be fed with the title, and the third field is the body, and the body that is inside my table list is going to be fed with the body from our SSMS SQL DB, that which is going to be converted to a string. Now we have successfully created an object from the SSMS SQL DB and then added it inside the list. Now our next work is to close the connections that we have established previously. So this step is really mandatory. Now our next work is to add the list view with the item source. This item source property is the property, so you have to watch out. It's items and then source, and then we'll be adding this list view with the source that will create out of the SSMS SQL DB table. Now we are all good to go with the implementation, but before that, let's head back to the main page.yaml. Here we have not created the label and the binding, that how the list view is going to get and grab the data. We have only provided the source. Right now our next work is to provide our controls, that is our label control, with the values that will be binded. That means our UI is going to call our ID, title and the body in the form of list. So our UI, that is our list view, is going to grab our this modal item content that we have fed data from our SSMS SQL DB from the reader. That's why we are going to bind this UI each individual controls. Now I'm just going to paste it to make my life easier over here. So our list view is going to bind our ID, title and the body. So we are going to place three rows items, that is grid.row 0. In grid.row 0 there will be ID, grid.row 1 there will be title, and on third row will be having our body. Now let's go to the main page.xaml.cs. You to use some try catch technique in order to handle any exception that will arise whenever we are doing some any operations like data fetching as well as data posting or anything. And then here let's create a catch exception with ex variable, so that which will get grabbed whenever our get operation is not successfully done. So here await app.current.mainpage.display alert, that is we are going to show the user that what is the error whenever it try to get the item from Ssms SQL DB table. Now it requires a sync operation over here, so I'm just going to create a sync operation. Now just add a variable name as alert, and then ex.message is going to give the message of the error message which get arised whenever it tries to create the connection. Now let's copy this line of code and then paste it wherever it's needed. And in our previous tutorial, whenever one button was clicked, then we were able to check the connection, right? So again we are going to copy that same alert message code and then paste it inside this button clicked. That is, whenever that button was clicked, that is our check connection button is clicked, then we are going to alert the user that the connection was successfully done. That's all. Okay, so this button click resembles to the check connection button, so you have to clearly mention about the check button connection clicked. Okay, and then every time we have to close the SQL connection. All right, here we have done some mistake also during the time of closing the connection. I'll just cut it and then paste it after the while loop, that is till our whole loop ends we are not going to close the connection, and then keep on adding it inside the my table list. Now we can just successfully run the app and then see whether we are going to get our some authentic output or not. First step is to check the connection. The second step is to get the items from the SQL Ssms DB. We just establish the connection. After clicking on OK, then our SQL connection dot close will just inherit. Now you can see we got our my list table from our Ssms SQL DB. We have successfully called out two items that is inside the Ssms SQL DB table. So you can see dbo.mytable is being called inside our mobile app, and then the get operation has been successfully completed. Now our next work is to perform some post operation. That is, we are going to send data to the Ssms SQL DB table. So this is the exact place where everything will happen. So here we have a post button clicked, right? So now we are going to copy this Ssms SQL DB connection code, that is a global variable, and then first of all we are going to create a try catch operation that I have already mentioned above, and then we are just going to copy and then paste it over here, so that we'll just catch some exceptions whenever our post operation fails. Now let's copy that same line of code, that is SQL connection.open, that is we are going to create SQL connection. I'll just zoom it a little bit so that it is visible. Now our next work is to create the Ssms SQL queries as well as the connection strings. So here you can see we can use just using statement also, and then put a command, and we have what we have previously initialized for our get operation, right? So same thing, we can just initialize a SQL command and then encapsulate inside the using statement too. Now our next work is to the same thing that we have done for our getting operation, that is passing the SQL connection whenever a command is executed. Then our next task is to send the data from our user UI to the Ssms SQL DB table. So in order to do that, we should have something called as the query string. So same thing here also, we are going to create some query string, or you can just create a variable name as string and then query string, and then add this line of code. That is, we are going to insert. So I just recommend you to watch lots of web URLs as well as videos in order to get the SSMS SQL DB connection using C#. That is highly recommended before you go ahead. So here we are going to insert one query, that is SSMS SQL query, in order to insert our data inside our dbo.mytable. So we are going to insert our table with the data that we collect from the mobile UI. So in order to do that, we'll just insert our table with some values, that is our ID, title and the body. So ID is going to be encapsulated with @, another title is going to be encapsulated, and then our title and the body is also going to be encapsulated. Now our next task is to get this command. So command dot parameters, then add each parameter, that is ID, title and body, that is SQL parameters. Then we are going to add our ID with the text field, the entry field ID, that is the user is going to add the ID, and then you can see over here the user ID is the name, that's why we have given the entry field with the user ID dot text. So in order to capture the data out of the entry text, we are going to use some user ID dot text, and same goes for three fields, that is ID, title. This title should be same as SSMS SQL DB the title and the body. All right, so we are going to grab our user title, user body, and then send it to the SSMS SQL DB table, that is our dbo.mytable with ID, title and the body. I think you have understood it, what we are going to do, that is sending our title, ID and the body. Now our last work is to execute the non-query and then end it. We need to await the operation and tell the user that you have successfully posted the data to the SSMS SQL DB table, that is our dbo.mytable. So congrats, you have just posted data. Now let's close the connection with SQL connection.close over here, CLSC close. Now let's stop the project, and then now just add some breakpoints so that you can just catch the exceptions anywhere in the project by hitting F5. Now you can see over here our next objective is to add the data, that is ID, title and the body. First of all, we have to check the connection, as we know that, right? So checking the connection is going to first of all establish the connection. Now our next work is to just remove this breakpoint, as we don't need as of now. Our next work is to add the ID with 3, that is we are going to send third data inside the SQL SSMS DB table, that is dbo.mytable, and then the title is title 3, and this is just third body that is going to be sent, that is a post operation is going to be hit, and you can see over here we have successfully sent the data SSMS SQL DB table. That's all. Now you can see we can just perform a get operation to get the third item from the table. Now we are all done with the get as well as the post operation, that is sending as well as getting the operation. Now our next objective is to perform some update operation, that is specific ID is going to be updated that respected ID. So I really recommend you to use some primary keys, because you don't have to do this type of ID addition whenever you use primary key, because you can grab that ID and then send it whenever you are updating any of the contents. So same operations I am just going to follow up for our update button click, that is try catch operation, and then catching any exceptions as well as the error handling. And then our next work is to use the same line of code, that is SQL connection dot open, because every time we need to open the connection, and as soon as the connection is completed, as well as all the operation is finished, then we are just going to close the connection. Now our in order to perform this update operation, we have to write another query, and then in order to do that, we are just going to create a variable name as int space that needs to be updated. So whenever user sends this ID dynamically to this operation, then the corresponding title and the body is also to be updated. So you can see over here, we are going to update this ID number 2 with some updated title and the body. So in order to do that, we are just going to add the IDs, the updated title as well as the body. So here, in order to do that, we'll just create a variable name as ID to be updated, and then this ID is the integer, right? That's why we'll just collect ID from the user input field, that is the user input field is going to provide us the ID. Then what we are going to do, we are going to update the title also, right? So the updated title will be, so this is the title so field that will be updated from our user entry field. So user title dot text is the text that need to be updated on to that corresponding ID from the UI. All right, so I'm just going to copy paste to make my life easier over here. So body to be updated, that is we are also updating the body, right? So here we are just going to change this variable name as user body. That's all. Now our next work is to create a connection string like what we have done for our get as well as the update operation. So string space query string equals, going to add SQL query that is initialized from $ at first in order to update our ID with the corresponding values that is provided by the user. So this is the table that is to be added over here, that is we are going to update the table, and then we are going to set our ID at first. So ID will be initialized with single quote and then curly braces that is starting as well as ending, and which will add the ID that is to be updated. So first of all, the ID is also going to be updated. Along with that, we are going to update our title, then the body. So comma title equals, this is the title. So same name should be there, you shouldn't change that thing. So title is going to be using the title that is to be updated from our user UI. So the title is going to be passed and then separated by the body. So body equals, and then single quote and the curly braces and the body that is to be updated. So we have successfully completed the thing that is to be updated, but we have to set our ID that is going to be acting as like a mediator to update those contents. So whenever the ID is 2, then we are going to update our ID, title and the body. So this is how the query works. So in order to understand more about query, I really recommend you to watch some YouTube videos or any social media platforms in order to get knowledge regarding the SQL query and how it's used in order to connect our C# code along with the Ssms SQL DB connection for our web app or any other platform. So this is the query string that we will be using in order to connect our mobile app to the Ssms SQL DB. So same thing goes over here. So the same operation we can just copy and paste, and then using statement is going to create a command, and then we can just directly I'll just zoom it in order to show it to the viewers more clearly. And then you can see we are just going to execute the non-queue query after it's completed. Now let's copy this line of code and then paste it over here. We are going to notify the user that the update operation was successfully completed whenever that update button was clicked with the data that was provided by the user. So congrats, you have successfully updated row item. Alright, so the row item is updated whenever the user clicks on update button. So here you can see I'm just putting some breakpoint and then running the app. Let's wait for some time till it loads. So it is loading the app. Now we can just check the connection at first, and the connection was established successfully. Now our next work is to update the ID number 2 with updated title and the updated body. So bingo, the title, I'll just rename that title, there is a typo. So this is updated body. Now if I click on post this update operation, then we have to get a successful output. Okay, we got a successful output that the row item was successfully updated. That's great. Now we can just get the operation. Okay, the connection was not closed, that means we have done something issue over here, but we have successfully updated our row items. So I'm just going to close the connection. Like same thing, we have just done some mistake over here, so I'm just going to close the connection, and you can just run the app in order to get the successful output. So after running the app back again, we can just get the data items to see that the second row item was successfully updated. That's great. Now our next thing that we need to implement is the delete operation, that is user is sending the ID that is to be deleted. So same thing, we'll just follow up same pattern, that is try catch technique and then exception ex, and then we are just going to copy and paste the code over here. The same thing, you can just remove this throw operation because that was crashing the app previously. So async operation, then a connection dot open. I'll just zoom it a little bit so that it is visible to the audience over here. So pasting over here, that is the SQL connection dot open, and then we have to close it. All right, so now we are going to write some queries for our delete operation too. The same thing that we have done for our update operation, that is the ID that need to be updated, right? So same thing, the ID that is to be deleted is going to be got from the user entry field, that is user ID dot text. So the ID is done. Now our next thing is to copy the same SQL command using statement over here. So let's close it. Now our next thing is to I'll just put some tab over here so that it will format it well. Now our next operation is to add the query for our delete operation. So in order to do that, we are just going to add some $sign that we have used for our update operation. So delete from debugger.myTable ID equals the ID that needs to be deleted, that is line number 155. So I'll just put that inside the curly braces and then end it with the SQL connection. That's all. Now the ID is going to be deleted, and then we have to just command.execute query. Finally, after the using statement is done, then we have successfully closed the connection, right? Now our next thing is to update the user that the operation was completed. Congrats, you have successfully deleted the row item. Put some breakpoint, and then whenever the app is running, then you need to press F5 in order to go through the debugging mode. So let's wait for some time till the app loads. So the item number 3 is going to be deleted from the table. So I'm just going to add id. First of all, get the connection, that is successfully done. Then the id number 3 is going to be deleted. So you can see over here the id that needs to be deleted, and the SQL query was successfully executed, and then we have successfully deleted the row item. You can just get the operation to see if the item was deleted or not from the SSMS SQL DB table. So we have successfully completed the CRUD operation, and I really want you to investigate more, dig down more in order to implement the SSMS SQL query and then use it inside your mobile app, and it's really a fun.